You know, I was listening to Biden when he offered Africa a seat at the G-20 summit. And the first thought came to my mind was, now you want them to sit down with you. Listen, let me say something to the continent of Africa. I know a lot of y'all in Africa thinks that everyone in America, especially the so-called Black Americans, think that Africa is a country. That's not true. And regardless of what I say, you're still going to have that false narrative that just because we say Africa, we think that Africa is a country, but we know that it's a continent. We learned about Africa back in elementary school, junior high school and high school. We learned how to read maps, okay? So you need to stop that lie. Okay, second of all now, I listened to President Nana Akufo-Addo. I think that's how you pronounce his name. Forgive me if I'm butchering that name. But Africa and Africans need to be extra careful of the politics of the United States. There is no way that America, especially the so-called Biden administration or the Democrats, are going to receive you as an equal. Now, by Biden offering a seat with the G20 summit, that's only a straw man. Okay, that's a straw man seat. That's you there. It's not real. You're just there because they want something from you. If they can't treat the so-called Black Americans with respect and equality, how do you expect them to treat you fairly and equally? Although you're offered a seat at the G20, you now become the spook that sat by the door. They offer you a seat, but yet they really don't accept you as equal. Not too long ago, they were trying to destroy Africans. When they need to test pharmaceuticals, they go to Africa and use the people of the continent of Africa as guinea pigs. Okay, so they're trying to knock us off. And I'm careful with the words that I use, but they're trying to do away with us. They're trying to lessen the population of the darker race. And now all of a sudden, Biden now wants to throw $55 billion at Africa, thinking that you're just going to jump at that opportunity, but yet they want your natural resources. And I still can't understand for the life of me is why the continent of Africa, all those countries, are allowing foreign nations to come in and rape them. I just can't understand. And you wonder why that you're not on the top or you're not modernized and your people now are leaving. And I always question. Now, I listen to a lot of these Africans on social media, which I think that they're plants to try to encourage or convince the so-called Black Americans to come to Africa to support Africa, but yet Africa does not support the so-called Black Americans. Now, when I hear the presidents of these 50 some odd countries in the continent of Africa, when I hear you stand up and tell people like Biden that no, we don't accept your deal, take that 55 billion and give it to the so-called Black Americans as reparations because they are Africans too, because that's what you say. You're saying that the Black Americans are Africans, and you're saying that the so-called Black Americans need to come back home. So why aren't the presidents of these countries in the continent of Africa speaking out for the so-called Black Americans? Take that money that you're offering us and pay reparations to the so-called Black Americans, and then we can talk. But how are you going to respect us and treat us equally when you don't treat your own people or the people that's in there that was taken, that was raped, that was stripped of their language, their land, their nationality, their culture, stripped down to less than being an animal. How could you not treat them with respect? But yet you now want us to sit at the table and we expect you to treat us fairly. Now, I want you to listen what Biden has to say, and then I'm going to continue speaking on this. But listen to what Biden has to say.
As I said yesterday, the United States is all in on Africa and all in with Africa. African voices, African leadership, African innovation, all are critical to addressing the most pressing global challenges and to realizing the vision we all share, a world that is free, a world that is open, prosperous, and secure. Africa belongs to the table in every room where global challenges are being discussed, and in every institution where discussions are taking place. That's why I announced in September at the United Nations General Assembly that the United States fully supports reforming the UN Security Council to include permanent representation for Africa. And today I'm also calling for the African Union to join the G-20 as a permanent member of the G-20.
Why all of a sudden now? Why now in 2022, heading into 23, now all of a sudden you want to offer Africa a seat at the table? I hope the presidents within the countries of in Africa would not accept that. Don't trust it. If they can't treat the so-called black Americans as an equal, they're not going to treat you equal. They're not going to treat you equal. Biden is an open racist. And there's no way that he's going to treat you equal. He wants your natural resources. He's competing with China. Now, if anything, you stick with China because China has always been with you. I don't agree with China setting up their police stations. And I always question, where's the military? Where's the Air Force? Where's the Navy? Within the continent of Africa. Where's your military to protect your people? Now, it's easy to tell the so-called black Americans to come back home. But why should the so-called black Americans move to Africa when they're not protected? The people of Africa are not protected. So just any other nation can come in and rob and rape the people within that continent and nothing is done about it. Africa does not go after their people like, say, if America had someone over in Russia or Russia had someone here or China, what have you. They show off their military might. I have not seen any type of military might within the continent of Africa. So how can you protect your people? The so-called black Americans now, if they now transfer to Africa or become citizens within Africa, where's their protection? Now, it's easy for you to say, oh, come back and help us build Africa. This is your home. You're an African. You're black. You're dark. It's easy to say that. But there's a history here. An unsolved history. You see the struggles of the so-called black Americans, and even with those that's coming from the continent now, they do not bond or mix with the so-called black Americans to fight for their freedom or their rights or even reparations. But instead, you have these same Africans that come to America that think you're special because the white man allowed you to come here. Now you think you're special. And you could tell so-called black Americans, oh, you need to forget about it and move on. You know, you're not the only ones that went through a struggle. We too were enslaved too after you guys were taken. But yet you still have connections to your homeland. You still know your name. You still know your culture. That was stripped from the so-called black Americans. So it's easy for you to say that, oh, we suffered too. There's wars and struggle going on now. So you're not the only ones, black Americans, but black Americans are called black Americans for a reason. They're called African American for a reason. They're called Afro American for a reason. They're called colored for a reason. They're called other bywords for a reason, because they don't know who they are. They have no connections to the motherland. But yet it's easy for you to come from the motherland with your culture, and then you brag about how many languages you speak. Oh, we speak 2 languages. We speak 3 languages. We speak this. And black Americans, you're ignorant because you don't know. Well, maybe you're the one that's ignorant because you have no idea of the struggle of the so-called black Americans. You're told by your parents to not even marry or intermingle with the so-called black Americans. So you come here to America, and now you're questioning why. And I saw these young ladies on YouTube question, why don't black American men go to Africa and get them a wife? Well, because you guys are told not to intermingle with us. And not only that, the African females that do come here to America, your eyes are fixed on white people. You want a white man because you want somebody that's doing well in life, that's going to take care of you. Your eyes are fixated on Asians, although you're discriminated against in Asian nations. You're discriminated against in the UK. We see what goes on with you, but then you come here and you look down your nose at the so-called black Americans, and you're told by your parents not to intermingle with them. Don't get with those Akatas. They're drug dealers. They'll kill you. And now you're trying to preach to us that you are African, come back home. It's a beautiful place. We welcome you here. Well, if Africa was so lovely, why did you flee? Why are you here and not in Africa? It reminds me of this movie, Trading Places, with Eddie Murphy. And that's what I see happening. You want to trade places. You want black Americans to go to Africa, and while you come here and take the place. Right? But if Africa was really for the so-called black Americans, and I give respect to the President Nana Akufo-Addo. Now, it could be, I know I'm butchering the man's name. Forgive me for that. But he is the only one that I heard of that mentioned the so-called black Americans. Now, while you sit down at this G-20 summit table and you're negotiating because you have something they want, so the ball is in your court. You have the power and authority to ask for anything you want because they need your help. Why not speak in favor of the so-called black Americans if you view us as a part of you? Why not you tell Biden, well, listen, you need to take care of the black Americans now and pay them reparations? If Biden gives Africa, I read in one article, and I could be wrong, $400 some odd billion. If you could give that money to the continent of Africa to help them out, do you not know that that's much more than $200 some odd thousand per person in America for black Americans? It exceeds that. So it's more expensive for you to send money to the continent than for you to pay the so-called black Americans the few pennies and call it reparations. Black Americans should not be paying tax. We should be tax exempt. And if you owed any taxes, that should be wiped clean. Black Americans should be given land. Not just here, but also the continent. If you're saying that the Black Americans are Africans. But you just want Black Americans to come there and work and build Africa like America, like Black Americans built America. And other nations of the world where we were scattered. You want free labor without giving nothing in return. Although Africa assisted in selling the so-called Black American ancestors into captivity. I'm going to play the rest of this video.
Whether it's been a long time in coming, but it's going to come. And today I'm also, whether we're upholding or defending the foundation principles of global peace and security enshrined in the UN Charter and the UN and in the AU's seminal documents, or meeting the challenges that impact every nation. The people of Africa are indispensable partners delivering the progress that benefits everyone, not just in Africa and the United States, but the whole world.
Okay, see now, again, like I said, this is insane, man, because you guys are going to fall for it. You're going to fall for the okie doke, because I already see Africans on TikTok talking about this is a great thing, this is a big thing, and maybe it's big to you, but you don't know this government like we know this government. See, and once you accept this money, now you're in their claws. You think that you're going to be treated as equals, when all this other time they've been trying to destroy you. They're using the continent and the people on the continent as guinea pigs, testing pharmaceutical drugs. And now you think that they're going to allow you to sit at their table and treat you fairly? It's just until they're able to get what they want. They're competing with China. So if you're really concerned about the so-called Black Americans, then at these meetings, these G-20, see, these meetings about reparations got to go beyond the so-called Black Americans. Africans from the continent need to jump aboard. And then the president of these nations that Biden is trying to talk business with, now you have a voice to say, look, those are our people. They belong to our nation. Since you need to be a part of a nation to receive reparations, you have reparations given to our tax dollars given to Ukraine and all these other places that don't benefit the American people. And there's a lot of Americans that's now struggling, and you expect Biden to come over and help Africa? Allow you to sit down at the table, make you feel special? While they got a knife or dagger in their hand stabbing you in the back. Be careful. Especially if you don't have no military. And maybe you do. Maybe you just not showboating the military, your military might. But I don't know of too many African countries, man, that was displaying their military power that can actually compete. So that's what I got to say, man. It's like, I don't trust it personally. When I hear the presidents in the continent of Africa stand up and speak out for the so-called Black Americans and let them know, look, we can't sit at the table until you treat them right. How do we expect you to treat us right when you're not treating the people in your own country right, the descendants of slaves? You're not treating them right. So until you start doing right by them, we can't talk. Until next time, I'm fearless.